Jaun Andreok, Azkuna Zentroaren izenean, arratsaldeon eta ongi etorri.
Ladies and gentlemen, and on behalf of the Azkuna Center, good evening and welcome to the International Festival of Letters in Bilbao.
Welcome to the Bilbao International Literature Festival. We want to emphasize the authentic pleasure that is for us to meet you here again. Para abrir boca hemos tenido la gran oportunidad de disfrutar.
We've had the wonderful opportunity of enjoying a unique performance. Wasn't it exceptional? Sisyphus Ascending and live music too by Johann Segerberg. The circus, dance, music. Lars has experimented with all sorts of things. So we've kicked off very well, and we've eliminated these barriers, and those barriers that exist and those that do not exist. So we're talking about the acrobats of life, those of us that work in the field of culture. And he has just pointed this out excellently well. So thank you very much indeed, Mr. Aborto, the mayor. And welcome everybody to this edition of Gutun Zuria. So it is true that all of us that enjoy reading, you know that we live with the writers that we admire, and we also feel proud of reading. It's in the enjoyment of literature takes us beyond in this festival. So we go beyond pure enjoyment at this festival, and it has become a mandatory appointment for us. So once again, Gutun Zuria goes beyond the words of books with music and pictures through the plastic arts. And this is how all of this manifests itself perfectly well. So this is a reference this festival for those of us that have this interest in contemporary literature. And it's an essential event to get to know creators, men and women, and to share with them our wishes and our desires, and why not, our expectations too. Workshops, conversations, encounters with publishers, with creative people, the literary room, the radio, and exhibitions, concerts that bring together music and words, and all of this always accompanied by that complicity that we have to underscore once again in this auditorium. And tomorrow, well, we're going to have mano a mano on photographic fiction. And we have three references, Cristina Demider, Joan Fonto Cuberta, accompanied by Agustin Fernandez Mayo. And, well, we'll also be focusing on the creation of the Basque language and the connection between this and other subjects, and this is what we're going to be talking about. We have Xavier Alcano and Xavier Anzarain, and Carlos Fonseca, Juan Bico, and Valerie Mergen. And on the 5th, there will be another 3 creative people attending a panel discussion. Daniel David Chivite and Daniel Serugarte and Beñat Achaga, the leading writer. So there's going to be a dialogue on literature and a narrative of audiovisuals. So we'll have Iñaki Esteban, who will talk to Enrique Villamatas, and also Alicia Kopp.
Tattoo and art, tending bridges between both concepts, starting from contemplating the book as a creative and open process to artistic expression, and at the same time observing the images as a testimony and also a document. Zer gehiago esan dezakegu, noski babeslei ere.
So many thanks to the sponsors of this event for their collaboration in organizing this Boton Zuria. And there's something else that I wanted to point out, and that is the participation of all of you, the members of the audience. So without a doubt, your presence, your participation is extremely important. So 1 for Spanish, 2 English, and 3 the Basque language. And well, you know that literature is like music, and this is what Mayelen Lujambio is going to be talking about. Letters are music, and we'll be soon listening to her. And then after that, we'll have the Mayelen Lujambio conference. And well, to attend that conference, you have to leave the room and then come back in again. So our guests are ready, the audience is ready too. And let's move on to the first discussion with Verónica Gerber and Iván de la Nuez. As I was saying, it's a visual artist who has many projects, and we have Caristopic, Otro Día, Poemas Sintéticos, and for instance, Pablas Migrantes. And our next guest is Iván de la Nuez, who's he's a critic and a curator, and he's got things, works like the Comunista Manifiesto, La Balsa Roja. And we also have to mention his exhibition like Parque Humano, Voz Capital, and there was also a retrospective exhibition on art and cities in the 21st century, Iconocracia, Pintar con el Tiempo, and always never real but also true. This is Gutun Zuria. So let's start and let's receive them with a warm round of applause, please. Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. I'm very grateful for opening this festival, where the dream of mixing art and literature, and in other words, it's all about mixing everything, and well, this is like an exhibition, is like a festival, and perhaps, well, this is what a center like this should portray. So we've been asked at this Azcuna Center to open the festival with this conversation, and I think that this is a tremendous opportunity which I'm going to transform into an honor. It's an honor because I'm going to be holding a conversation with Verónica Gerber Bicecci, who's an artist and writer, and well, she's a creative person that works with words and visual images, and in a way, I think that she defines what the North is all about, and that is the intention of this festival. So whenever we come along here, well, this is like another chapter of what it is we want to express at this festival. Or this is connected to what you can see in the exhibition, but this chapter is a synthesis of the festival too. And well, the work by Verónica, she's got many books that are excellent, like Mudanza o Conjunto Vacío, and at the same time, well, she also bases her exhibitions on the way she plays with literature. And we were speaking to Verónica before we arrived here this afternoon, and we were talking about something that is very interesting in her work and which I believe anticipates the language of the future. And whenever we think about the future, and when we think about a futuristic novel, or whenever we think about a futuristic film, we always think about technology, and we think about what already exists and which nobody could imagine in filmmaking or literature. And we use all sorts of gadgets of this kind on a daily basis, but we don't think about the language of the future. And Verónica is an artist and a writer that has used this language of the future, and she's created tunnels or tubes that creep into the silence of language too, because here we're talking about where the periods and the commas go, but well, that's what we do. But she has been very intelligent because she's transformed this into corridor that goes from literature to art, but also from silence to a new manner of expressing things. So this symbiosis between art and literature is nothing new. When Michel Montaigne, who's the founder of modern essays, defined what this is all about, it's like painting yourself. So he already alluded to the text or to his text as if it was something that was similar to painting. And when you talk about a portrait of an adolescent artist, we're talking about literature that refers directly to the portrait, which is pictoric, of course, but it could also be photographic, it can be audiovisual, etc. We have Chesterton, Oscar Wilde, Henry James, and these are all authors that move from literature to the arts and from arts to literature. And then we have Marsa Porta or Jana Siri Hudsberg, or we have Julian Rios or Vicholevec. So it can be said, therefore, that we have a very strong connection between art and literature, and there are many, many people involved. At the beginning, it's as if it were just another topic of literature, but soon things became complicated to become not a fashion, but a mode. It's not that we talk about artists or about collectors or curators of shows or impossible museum directors, but this has become a way of constructing literature. And when you when you read a book by Verónica or by Maria Gainza, an Argentinian writer, or even by Rodrigo Reis Rosa, you can see that in the construction of the literature, she uses mechanisms that can be found in art exhibitions like files. So I had to deliver a more or less formal introduction for tonight's festival, and now we're going to open the dialogue with Verónica. Verónica, welcome, and thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. And well, we're going to be improvising the conversation a bit, and I'm very interested in having you describe what Goethe said were the internal mechanisms of writing, and in your case, and I know that you do visual arts, so how did you achieve that, and what are these mechanisms, and how do you move between those two fields, and what is it they provide you with? And is this schizophrenic zigzag, or is this conducive to something that is neither one thing nor the other? So I want to start off with that then. Well, hello, good evening, and many thanks to you, Iván, for inviting me to the exhibition and to the festival, and also many thanks to the Azcuna Center for all this work. I'm very happy to be here and to be able to speak to you and with the audience and to answer your questions regarding the internal mechanism of writing. I think that the piece that I suggested for the exhibition that was created by Iván, although you say comisario in Spanish, I don't like the word comisario. It sounds like a detective. It sounds like somebody connected to the police. Yeah, well, you can't do anything about these words. Yes, well, we have to make up double language to describe these things. But in any case, I proposed a piece that I made specifically for the exhibition, and I call it a visual translation of a text by Susan Sontag, who's the theoretician of the arts and a writer and a novelist. And this is something she wrote in a book that is called Radical Styles. And it's a text that is called The Signification or the Significance of Silence. And among many other important sentences and phrases on silence, she says that without the structure of silence, language would fail, or communication would fail, everything would collapse. And, well, by referring to that idea and some others, I decided to do a translation based on, well, scoring that text as if it were a tunnel to reach another point, which is visual. It's as if it were a visual translation, or if you want, it's as if it were a visual rewriting of the text. So what I think is that when you think about silence, what I'm trying to do in that piece is open up the hidden mechanism of writing, because one of the hidden mechanisms of writing would be that of silence that make it possible for there to be a language. And this is where we have this unfolding, or this deployment. And this piece, you can see it in the exhibition, in the gallery, but this is all about the aesthetics of silence that answers this question, or at least it tries to address that question or re-elaborate that question. And as regards to this schizophrenia of being a visual artist and a writer, well, in reality, I reached that point because I don't really feel that this is a schizoid element in which I have to change my personality and in which I have to change my face either, as if I have to be one thing or the other. And let's say that the definition that I established some time ago always attracts people's attention, which is a visual artist that writes. And this is an attempt at being intellectually honest, basically, which has to do with recognizing how I trained and where I was trained. I was born in Mexico, I live in Mexico, and I was trained in Mexico as a visual artist at Esmeralda, which is the National School of Engravings and Painting. And this is my training as a visual artist, and I write because this recognizes what I do, and that is I write with images or with words. But I think that from the place where I work, or my practice has to do with writing, and it could be visual or non-visual writing, but this is where the visual arts and literature converge in writing, in an idea that is elastic and extensive, like this festival, so to speak. So this is why I'm very glad to be here tonight, and to participate in all the lectures that are going to take place. And then as regards the connection between the visual arts and literature, which is what brings us here, as a visual artist that writes, I always try to talk about images, texts, and writing, but I never talk about the visual arts and literature because they are more extensive, and that makes me feel a little bit more afraid. But I do believe that there's a genealogy that is very extensive in Europe and Latin America where we can add on more and more names. And while I was concerned, or let's say that I was trained by a Latin American artist like the Mexican Ulises Carrion, and in Mexico he's known as the first conceptual writer, or one of the few conceptual artists born in Mexico. And in fact, he had a retrospective at the Reina Sofia not too long ago, and well, everybody knew, well, very few people knew Ulises Carrion, and all of a sudden there was a big boom about Ulises Carrion. And then Mirta del Bisache in Argentina, and I'm really interested in that artist, and she wrote with an illegible language, with graphics that apparently have no meaning. And well, then we have Juan Luis Martinez from Chile with a new novel, which is a hybrid book with photographs, texts, photocopies, etc. And anyway, well, let's say that this. Well, let's say that we also have a dialogue with all of the other people that you mentioned in Latin American genealogy, and I don't know what else to say. Well, I'd like to ask you, because yes, why not, now that we are holding this conversation, I would like to know how you reached this north of this relationship between images and text. I haven't been able to ask you, well, since I arrived last night, but I think that it's something that everybody would be interested in discovering too. So how did you get there, and what took you all the way to this moment in which you curated this exhibition and also designed the contents together with the team, of course, at the festival? Well, this curiosity of mine dates back to 1994, and I was interested in, well, works done with pencil. It was at those days of magazines when the supplements had not yet gobbled up all the magazines in this country, and there was a certain amount of expansion there, and not only in terms of the size and volume of text, but also in the amount of time that you had to write things. And it was, well, after what I saw is that in the novels of those days, in the late 80s or early 90s, with David Meitzen, it's the story of a woman that is considered to be the last living human being on the earth. But she was experiencing that parallel reality at the Metropolitan Museum of New York. And this is where she continuously refers to a phantasmagoric mistress. And this is when Paul Aust and Julian Rios published his work too, and Muestrario. And what I soon noticed is that there was, well, Ignacio Bilal Folks too, who published his work. What I noticed is that contemporary art had entered literature. And at least in the Spanish literature or in Latin American literature, there had always been these moments in which there was a very large distance, a separation between the world of art and the world of writing. So it was very seldom did a telephone appear in the works of the 50s, because when we're talking about genealogy, we had people like Ivan Rosa in Catalonia, who was a visual poet, and he was a very contemporary poet. He could be here tonight speaking or exhibiting his works. And the fact that we had a Mexican like Octavio Paz, who's capable in releasing 2 essays on Marcel Duchamp simultaneously, just like a contemporary would do. But this was happening in the Anglo-Saxon world, and all you have to do is look at the covers of books of the Latin American writers, because they're always looking for classical subject matters. well, there are hardly any photographs, and there was hardly any contemporary art. But this changed. And I said, well, I'm never going to be able to buy certain things, but I can build an imaginary collection, and this imaginary collection is, well, it has to do with this art that appears in the novels and doesn't appear elsewhere. And then I also have to say, too, that I've found some very interesting mechanisms, because when I attended an exhibition and I took the catalogue that was full of the successes of artists, and there were no failures, and they didn't take any drugs, they didn't get drunk, and they were faithful, they were perfect human beings. In other words, they had a perfect curriculum. So what did these novels offer me? Well, not the curriculum, in other words, the biography of the artist, and it was fake, but it was true at the same time. It was full of things that are normally not seen. And then there was something else happened to me, which was very curious, that I addressed in this recent book of mine. And all of a sudden, I noticed that nobody was talking about something that I believe was like a madness, and it was about the future. Any catalogue of contemporary art starts talking about life, and in reverse, it starts in 2019 and reaches the mother's womb. So it's like a Freudian artifact. And I thought, well, this is going in the opposite direction. It's like Michael Jackson's dance. It looks as if he's going forward, but he's going backwards. Well, yes, when you study the visual arts, I say that when you make your portfolio, it has to go from the future to the past. But this doesn't happen with novels. Perhaps it's happening now. But in the case of a writer, what you do is you don't go forwards, you go backwards. And what I noticed is that there was, well, there was an important source, but above all, I noticed that there was a very specific language. And I would like to ask you about this, because you must bear in mind that as from 1989, and when the communist regime collapsed in Europe, what I also say is that when we had the PC, which was the Communist Party, and then we moved on to the PC, which is the personal computer. So then that's when societies kicked off, those based on digital work, and this is no coincidence. And of course, it's not only the Soviet Empire that collapsed, or a political system, but here what has collapsed is a culture to be replaced by another culture. And I think that here there has to be a completely different story, and this is where the era of images has started. So if we've opened this era, don't you think that there's been a mutation too in the role played by the intellectuals, and what things are intellectuals doing nowadays? Because we know that knowledge is transmitted through visual images. And, well, philosophy was our letters that human beings exchanged for 2,500 years. But now this letter has come to a halt, because it's not only a privilege that is connected to writing. So the question is, aren't you the people that are exploring this new mixed language? Aren't you the new intellectuals of the 21st century, of the new culture? That's the question. Well, we have to put the blame on future generations. But as regards the era of images and the exchange of work of digital proletariat, well, I thought about this a short time ago, but I'm not fully convinced about that, because I know that there are lots of more philosophical theories that have a stronger basis than mine to say that we live in the era of images. But I'm not fully convinced about that idea. And a short time ago, I did a rewriting exercise. Many of the things that I do have to do with rewriting texts by others, not only to read them and to understand them better, but also to update them according to the present. And I decided to rewrite a visual essay that was very small. I don't know at what extent you know it, and these are Las Palabras y las Imágenes, and this was written in the early 20th century by René Magritte, the artist who was supposed to be surreal, but I think that he went beyond surrealism, because part of his life had to do with that avant-garde. But I think that his work goes beyond that. or touches upon other areas. And in that essay, well, he launched a pretty abstract declaration of principles on how he worked on his painting. He explains the connection between images and text. So I decided to rewrite that text, and in the rewriting, I wanted to update it. And, I spoke about the internet, and I thought about what was happening. One of the conclusions that I came to through my writing, and as I enjoy thinking about the present, is that we're not living in the era of images, but rather in the calligrammatic era. Why? Because I believe that the internet is possibly the most complex calligram, and it's possibly the most perfect one that has ever existed too, in two senses. Well, when you surf the internet, there are pictures and text, but there's also sound, and there are also other sensorial things. But basically it's image, text and sound, and this mixture is a sort of calligram, but also in the way it unfolds. In other words, that there's language behind the internet, which are the zeros and the ones, which is the binary code. And this means that the internet is a calligram that we can see and not see at the same time. Because one of the general characteristics of the calligram, in which there's a poetic text that adopts a shape, for instance, if I write a poem on a ball game, you know that the text is going to adopt the round shape of the ball. And when I see the ball, I can't read the text on the ball. And when I read the text on the ball, I cannot see the ball. So you either see or you read, although both things have to do with reading. So this is what I think is going on today, because we are more or less in a calligrammatic era, and this is also reaffirmed by memes that have been underestimated by our intellectual culture. But I think that there are lots of things that have to be thought about in this connection, and there are lots of them that are perhaps very silly, but there are others that are thinking about the connection between images and texts from very interesting angles. So that's what I believe. We are in the calligrammatic era, and that this substitution of work also forces this connection between image and text, which is also the relationship between visual arts and literature. As regards intellectuals, well, I don't know who they are, and I hope that they will never arrive. Well, I think that we should do away with the word intellectual from our culture forever, and I think that it should be a citizen's culture. And in other words, we have to remove the hierarchy without authority or even without authors. Well, that's what I think anyway, and I know that this is a complex matter, but I think that the figure of an intellectual, although it is important, at least in Mexico, which is what I can talk about more directly, it was also very harmful for our sector and for our culture, and I think that it's also very patriarchal. It's completely patriarchal, and I think that this has to be removed too. And I also believe that the figure of the intellectual does not have room for the gender perspective, because the intellectual is equal to the face of Octavio Paz, saying things that people need to know. And I was fed up with that. Well, unfortunately, this happens in other countries too. And this forms part of a tradition that reached its peak at a certain point in time, and there are several titles now. And, I think that this is a totally masculine kind of literature, so to speak. But this Latin American intellectual, organic intellectual, that goes to speak to the President of the United States, who negotiates with a group of drug pushers or drug traffickers, well, perhaps the most interesting people are those that focus on the visual approach. Professor Guillermo Infante, in the case of filmmaking, and Severo Sarduy, who has a very direct connection with whatever has to do with painting and drawing or carnival and the popular culture, that I think is a very interesting thing. And I think that you also said something that practically all of us agree with here tonight, those of us that are going to be at this festival and at the exhibition, and what is that people do not work on something, but from a calligrammatic perspective, more like what Bruce Lee said, be water, my friend. Well, you talk about that, and you transform into water a text, and it's well, you don't need to have a text on water. It just has to be aquatic, because you, in a way, you are swimming or you are sailing on those waters. And when I approach your books, and when I approach your visual creation that you do, what I'm interested in, or what I like about the Moris de Vuelta and Ramon Cuberta's work, who are in the exhibition, and I think that Joan is going to be talking tomorrow night. But what I like is what you do is that construction work. You are constructing something that is fictitious, but not because you're making up another word, but rather because this is an exploration into truth. And it's not that it's very interesting to be realistic either, because we know that reality is constructed by people, and they are bombarding us with different forms of reality that want to make us not have to decide, nor to desire, nor select anything, because everything is already given. So I believe that in your work there is a way of leaving part of what it is we're going to be reading so that we can choose. And that's a very important element, because the human beings are animals that speak a language. And you mentioned that in your text that you published in a book of yours, in a very short book that I read some time ago. But I also believe that we're talking about a reading animal. So this is not only a language animal, but this defines the capacity to choose. And if we look at what is being taken away from this imposed reality, it is the possibility to choose, because there's so much supply relative to demand that you don't know what you need. And it's your needs that are being diluted, and in whatever is possible, because now everything is possible. We can all take thousands of photographs. We can all be artists too, as Boyce said. But it's not in the world of possibility where we have to explore. It's really what we need to have. And that's where we have to write, and that's above all where we have to silence. So we don't have to fill ourselves up to the brim with all of the things that we are experiencing. Well, in terms of what we need, what I would think again, I'd think about this again.
In the last pieces and researches I've been doing, I've been trying to concentrate on the idea of a future, and you sort of slightly mentioned it in the beginning. And I think this will answer to that. I think we do need words for the future, or language for the future. And I think, well, it's always quite sort of crazy what an artist can tell you when he's got lots of imagination. But I am thinking, and in part of my workshop here in this festival, relates to imagining how a language for the future should be like. And especially thinking that we still miss many words to understand the things we are living and the things that we are about to live. About the sort of storytelling about these catastrophes in the world, like Donna Haraway or many other authors. They are trying to sort of reverse this storytelling, because this kind of chaotic or catastrophic storytelling is very convenient for the capitalistic regime. And I think then we could consider that maybe the end should have another way out, and not this one of catastrophe or total disaster that has been over and over being repeated. And even though I love science fiction, and it appears in science fiction very often, and I'm thinking of a project that I've just finished in Mexico. The exhibition is still on, and there I was doing a similar workshop to the one that I am doing here in Gutun, Zuria. And this was about going to different schools and asking children to invent, to make up words for the future. And they will always said we will combine the existing words to create a new one. And I ended up with a vocabulary with some 700 words. And there we found things about feelings, about all the effective part in us that we always neglect, and also feelings, combining other feelings that we have at the same time, but then we don't have a word for it. I'm thinking of one that was made up by a teenager. He was in the secondary year, and it was morelido, and that he said, I feel morelido, and this is when I am with my girlfriend, and this is love, pain, and fear at the same time, and combined in Spanish, this led to morelido. And also to consider things related to cyborgs, to robots, and also to consider natural disasters to come, or social issues like conversa. This was made by a girl, and this was pollution, poverty, and disease. And this is the disease that we will suffer after a war. And they were making up all these words, and then I had some poets writing poems with those words. So this was about opening up this language to the future. This was a proposal to sort of speak from the future, with that language from the future, to sort of consider how we could open up our possibilities to sort of think out of the box. Because we are always thinking in terms of syntaxes and the established language and the discourse that we're used to. Well, I think this is also related to borders. We have economical, social, gender borders, and I think this is also about creative borders. And maybe the interesting thing is to see how they are diluting enormously, because we do no longer know where literature starts or finishes, where the arts start. This is a new language, a new way to explore language. And I think there is where there is that future that we're already living, but not necessarily as a post-human cult full of places where one can no longer live. I think we had that kind of language, and if we talked about the necessary over the possible or the feasible, I think we'll be able to sort of create a new room for a new world to make it more sort of habitable and without any fake rhetoric. And I think that will lay our responsibility, that responsibility of those new members of the academia or intellectuals that sort of will be part of the citizens as well. And they will be talking about, let's go on, instead of saying, no, don't do this, don't do that. No, they're not saying there's a new possibility for the world. We've created a new room for you. Yes, this could be a way to answer, she says, to something I'm often asked. Why combining visual arts and literature, are they not enough on themselves? Why should we combine them together? Why sort of trying to be there, trying to find a balance in between these two universes? And I've been asked this so often that I would like you to answer to that question. Well, I think the answer is a very ontological one. I think this is in the hands of those working in the field of culture. I think this needs no answer, because this is like a rhetoric question, and it sort of this combines in a natural way. In the times of Dada, Duchamp, I think this was like a non-natural target, but I think nowadays you have to do it. When you are sort of jumping into the underground, and at the same time you are reading something in your mobile phone. What are you doing? You are maybe reading a novel or a book. So people are now sort of walking with libraries, with their own libraries, with their own museums. So I think people are going to walk in here in a place like this one, and I think they're going to sort of walk out with your book, with Christina de Midel's photography. I mean, they're just going to walk out, just like carrying it and wearing it. They will be wearing it. So I think this is a new way of understanding culture. We no longer see that authority that sort of turns the author into the end itself, the final end of a career. I think now this is sort of happening in a very natural way. It all combines very naturally, and this is something we can no longer avoid. And there is where we are, and somehow I think this festival is going to work on this subject very deeply. Well, since you say that about the mobiles, phones and PCs, sort of like we walk carrying those things on us. And I'm going to move back to something that I said previously. I think one of the reasons why we are living in this calligrammatic time is because never before we saw so many people writing. If we see so many cell phones using all these messaging apps, if we put together all this text, there will be an infinite text, and then it will be also combined with different drawings and images, and sort of show the feelings behind these text. And also internet is like a giant text. So, I mean, this is a very utopic way to see it. Well, Eco said that Borges invited that in the Alep. And behind the internet and that giant text that we're all writing together every day with all the people that we write to, I think the creation of all these artifacts, I think is really bad for human beings, for those producing them, because each and every of these things that we buy is also like a lethal weapon for civilization, because it's got like a double face. When curating these, if you pay attention, this exhibition is not very technological. We must also be aware that just with a pencil or with a piece of paper, you might be playing football, and you don't need to be a slave of technology, and you don't have to think that you are really in the avant-garde because you have many more artifacts, and some people are not really connected nowadays in many parts of the world. So this is like we think that everybody is living the way we live in the Western world, and that is not the case. And I really liked how the artists working on the arts and the literature in arts, they show that possibility. It is not necessary to be ultra-technological to consider the future, to imagine the future, and even to build it. We've got your case, or Lenta Leon's, Alicia Cobb's. They make these drawings on the walls, and there we've got like 7 different conquests of human beings. And I think this is very important when we consider all this. Well, I think this is also about the body, she says, because when we're talking about images and text, so we forget that in between we always have a body that writes and that produces those images, that sits down there and that leaves a print in those materials. And I think in these pieces that you've mentioned in the exhibition is like that, but also in the covers that have been written with, yes, or drawn with just a pencil And I think there is a body, and there's also a body behind the screen, because we're not writing, things don't sort of get written by themselves. I mean, like, we need to use our fingers to do so, and maybe our fingers will change in the future if we keep on doing it. I think it's a pleasure to have this kind of conversation here. I love this format. It's the first time I have such a talk. And I was quite sort of scared in the beginning, but now I feel very comfortable, like at home. And it is true that when you just write with a cell phone or with a pencil, the good thing is that you know you don't have the last saying, you don't have the last word. We are interacting. And sometimes I am having a coffee in a bar, and then I am looking for comments. I don't know if this happens to you. And then suddenly you see, no, there are no comments, because this is just a digital thing, because people are not interacting there. So even if this is very wild, we have this culture of this interrelationship when you write and when people write back. So it is very interesting how we're using words. And sometimes what we are doing is we're overusing our own words. I don't know, maybe we should stop overusing our presence here. We are like little dictatorships here on stage, and maybe we should give the floor to the audience. Should you have any questions? We've got some minutes ahead of us. Please be nice to us, because even if it doesn't seem so, we are very stressed, and we have many days ahead of us in this festival, so be nice to us. And she says yes, and we're jet lagged too.
Nosotros no vemos de aquí para allá.
No.
No sé si... Ah, bueno.
Creo que no hay.
No, bueno, pues... Entonces, no sé si tú quieres decir algo más.
No.
No. Pues agradecidísimos.
Well, thank you very much then. Thank you for attending. And now I think we're going to sign books. Yesterday, when Veronica got here, I told her that I bought your book, and she said, oh, was it you then? Okay, so come on, some more people buying her books, please. Thank you very much.